Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another year of the OS World Cup. We started off last weekend with our qualifiers map pool showcase, and we are officially back. They have been run through and completed. All 53 teams appearing for qualifiers this year, playing their 2 runs, ranging from Thursday all the way until 19 UTC today. They are now completed, and we have our top 32 seeded teams, as well as our non-qualifying teams. I am ChillierPear, one of your organizers for the OS World Cup this year. I will be joined for this showcase by Azer and Damarsh. Looking forward to this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a good time to go through the seed reveals. There's always a bunch of surprises in there, so I think there's at least one major surprise in here for everybody.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing just the reactions really on some of these teams, because there is some good performances and there are some phenomenal performances from certain teams. But again, those will be later on. But we have quite a few teams to go through, don't we, Chillier?
Yes, we do. So we're going to run through the non-qualifying teams first. As usual, we'll run through 53 through 33 first. These are the teams that played qualifiers and unfortunately will not be joining us in the bracket stage this year. We're going to run through them relatively quickly. Nothing against the teams down here, but we do want to have a little bit of extra time to cover the teams that did qualify. So without further ado, we are going to be starting off the showcase this year with our 53rd qualifying team. It's going to be Switzerland. A little bit worse than last year, 42nd in terms of qualifying teams. We did have 3 more teams this year than last year, by the way, so we went from 50 teams to 53rd. Switzerland going to be bringing up the 53rd spot this year. Next up, going to be Team Croatia, placed 45th last year. They'll be taking the 52nd spot this year. Lost a couple of players from the previous year. Going to be going rebuilding next time. That is our 52nd seeded team. Slovakia up next, number 51. Placed 40th last year. Again, a little bit of a downgrade from that time. We have a 1.3 million team score average for Slovakia this year. We'll run over those as well. Next up, going to be our 50th seeded team, placing the exact same spot as last year, Colombia, with a 1.347 million team average on the board. No plus or minus for them this year. Next up, in our 49th spot is going to be Austria. A pretty decent drop for them this year, losing a lot of their top end of the roster, falling out of the qualifying teams from 30th all the way to the 49th seeded spot. Unfortunate to see them go this year. 1.49 million team score average. Next up, a new team returning from 2016, Team Greece. They did not pass group stage back in 2016. This is their first time joining us for the World Cup in qualifiers. Placing 48th, not going to be making it through this year. Wish them luck in next year should they come back out this time around. They didn't have Riven for qualifiers. Very unfortunate for them, one of their better players. Next up, 47 seeded team Belarus. This is their first time appearing in OWC, so big congratulations. Yes. Very true. So their first time coming out, 47 seed. A little bit of a push for next year. It's going to be next up with a Konam DTFC as well. But Azer was mentioning, don't want to skim over that. Their number 672 ranked player putting up an FC on the double time. Not very impressive from them.
It's a pretty noteworthy performance considering most players on the teams that are placing around this time that just don't have a single FC. So good job for at least one.
Big recognition for that. It's always good to see a player with a lot of potential here. Maybe enough potential to push them up a little bit higher for next year. Next up, going to be Team 45, Latvia. Most notably, Akolabed on this roster, putting up some pretty serious performances for them in qualifiers. Unfortunately, not quite enough to bring them to a qualifying spot. They placed 48th last year. A little bit of an improvement from them. Maybe a little bit more improvement next year. Going to push them up into a qualifying spot. 44th place is next up. It is Team Hungary, another team exactly the same as Team Colombia, placing in the same place from last year. 44th We are up to a 1.8 million team score now on these teams right here with Team Hungary. That is 44. Next up, 43, another team that is one of our new showings for this year. It's Kazakhstan. This is their first time playing the OS World Cup ever. They are not a returnee from the group stage years. And Comentators with some pretty impressive performances.
Yeah, no, seriously. Again, similar thing. Comentators putting up 3 separate full combos, Nomad 2, Nomad 4, and DT1. I'm pretty impressed by that, considering I think it's their first time in OWC as well. I think also technically Kazakhstan signed up last year but did not play or something like, or could not schedule a match or something like that. So, technically the first time.
Yeah, technically their first time with a placement in the tournament, not being able to show up to qualifiers last year. A little bit of an unfortunate situation. But yeah, Nomad 2, Nomad 4, and a DT1 FC from Comentators. A very impressive performance again from a non-qualifying team player. Next up in 42nd is going to be a fairly old returning team here, Bulgaria, 42nd seed. Their last appearance in the World Cup was in group stages in 2013. So we're actually looking at a pretty significant 9-year time difference between their last appearance in the World Cup. So very impressive and very good to see them returning again for the tournament this year. Unfortunately, not joining the bracket stage, but a good showing from them. Number 41 is next up. It's Team Lithuania. They placed 37th last year, so they've dropped just a little bit. Some good players on this team. Have to note players like Shinaru and BZE and Nitrem, and a lot of, Fibeth even too, ZDef, a lot of known tournament players on this team. Unfortunately, just not enough to push them to a qualifying spot. Some very, very stringent competition this year in order to make the top 8 teams. And unfortunately, no Azer 8 for Lithuania as well. So pretty rough go for them this year. Next up is our 40th seeded team. Is Team Vietnam. They placed 39th last year, relatively similar this year, just dropping a little bit. Some notable FCs from this team as well. Mizumi putting up a Hard Rock 1 FC and Realshin with a DT1 full combo. So some good performances from them on 2 of their players. Not going to be able to strut their stuff in the bracket stage as well, but coming pretty close. Maybe next year. Team 39 next up in qualifying spots is Team Uruguay. Very unfortunate. Again, another team that qualified last year that was unable to put up a similar performance to make it to the bracket stage this year. They will be falling 7 places. Very important, Kazuki K putting up a DT1 and DT3 FC for them, as well as El Milanga putting up a Nomad 2 full combo for them. So some pretty good performances from those players on Team Uruguay. Next up is Team 38, Argentina, our first of the non-qualifying teams to surpass the 2 million plus team average score marker at 2.122 million. Another team that is unfortunately not qualifying from last year. They placed 29th. Pretty comfortably within the qualifying team. Is going to fall out of it this year. Consistent as a team overall through their performances here. Richo with a Hard Rock 2 FC, Zeta with a DT1 FC, and Bomilk with an MVP of a 535,000 score average for their team. So a very good, consistent player on that roster, and some decent performances. But again, competition very, very strict between these teams this year.
Something to note here, actually, is just how much of a jump there is in average scores from 39 to 38. Here is when it gets really close, actually. There is a pretty clear gap. There's like a 200k gap in average score from that point onward. So every single one of these next couple teams, it's been really close.
Yeah, very true. You are not incorrect there. Uruguay, the team immediately before this at 1.997 million average score, jumping up quite a bit there. Next up, our 37th seeded team, just barely falling from last year from 36, unfortunately will not be qualifying again. It's Team Peru here. Something that absolutely has to be noted every single year, Mr. MG Hatsune Miku on this roster, also known as Arnold 24x24, full comboing Nomad 2, Hidden 2, Hard Rock 1, Hard Rock 2, Double Time 1, Double Time 2, Double Time 3. That is right, the F-seed 7 out of the 11 maps in these qualifiers this year. An absolutely ridiculous player, unfortunately not going to get to join the bracket stage once again.
The fourth highest on average score across all players, and unfortunately not qualifying, so...
I don't know if I'm remembering incorrectly, but was Arnold the top performing player in qualifiers last year? I feel like I remember his name coming up.
Yeah, I think it was a similar story.
Yeah, so Arnold's consistently one of the best players in this tournament, unfortunately not able to play a bracket stage match once again. We will continue to send our thoughts for Peru, and hopefully they are able to pull it forward in a future year. Next up, a team with a pretty notable improvement is Team Estonia. 36th place, unfortunately not qualifying, again, not making the top 32, but 43rd last year, a pretty decent improvement. Abyssal with a DT1 and DT3 FC, Cedru putting up a DT2 FC as well, both of them performing very well together across all of qualifiers this year. Good teamwork between the two of them, but they needed a little bit more from the rest of the roster to push them up those last 4 spots, and unfortunately, not going to be the year for them. Next up, in 35th, it's Team Malaysia. They placed 26th last year, a team, again, falling out of a qualifying spot. Very much have to note RAM packs for the roster this year. A Nomad 1, DT 1, 2, and 3 FCs. Pretty major MVP on their roster this year. Their highest ranked player by a pretty decent margin as well, ranked 157. A good baseline for next year, potentially, for them to make some improvements on that performance. Looking forward to seeing them back in future years again, maybe with some returning players. Next up, Team 34. Unfortunately, it's going to be Team Belgium. 2 spaces out. These 34th and 33rd slots are always very painful to see every single year, just barely not making qualifying placement. 41 last year, though, for Belgium, so a pretty decent improvement from them this year. Some notable scores: Hanori with a double time 1 FC, iBlue with a DT2 FC, and Hanori with an almost 600,000 score average across every single map. Hanori played every map for the team this year. Big MVP on them, but a little unfortunate. Again, 34th spot for them, just barely missing it this year.
And
next up,
last one.
Oh, this is painful. 33rd. It is the Team Netherlands. Oh, it's tragic. You really do hate to see it every single year. They placed 22nd last year. They lost a lot of good talent, especially not having Vivilium this year. They did gain a lot of players like Luciano and Skyrovania, still playing very well. Knight, with a Nomad 4 almost FC, and Aheo with a DT2 FC, but man, this hurts to look at every time. The 33rd spot.
And now for probably the most improved team, and the first time in OWC in a while, seed number 32, to Israel. They've managed to recover, man. Some of these players just really popped off. Mr. Potato, Painted Koala, and Chip just doing really well. Last year's placing at 47, and now they're in OWC. Congratulations.
Yeah, this is outstanding from them, really. 15 placement improvement is not something you see too often. We had a couple other teams this year, that improved by, like 11, 8 places, some pretty big margins, but this is almost double every other team's placement. So very good for them to get to 32 this year. 31 is going to be up next. It's Team Turkey. They fell a little bit from last year, but they're still going to put up a qualifying placement.
Yeah, Turkey, some fantastic scores from them this year. Hey Roni with some incredible FCs on Nomad 4 and DT1. And Gaheen Foil as well with the DT1 FC. So really strong overall DT1 performance. Look at that, 17, one of their highest alongside Hard Rock 2. As well as Nomad 2 as well. They've had some pop-off performances on some of these maps that have really managed to keep them in contention this year. So some good stuff from Turkey.
Good to see from them. Moving up to 30 next is going to be the Czech Republic. 27th place last year out of qualifiers. We saw some pretty decent performances from Villazi this year. Looks like the only FC on the team on Hard Rock 2 from them. However, the team performance and the backing scores from them enough to give them a solid qualifying spot this year. And they are secured in their placement.
The Hard Rock average is pretty high considering their seed 30 at the average of 15. Quite good, so be careful if you're up against them.
Yeah, very much so, honestly. You don't normally see, we talk about these lower seeded teams with higher averages like that. So it's good to know that there are teams down here that are putting up, top 20 performances on mods. Next up, it's going to be 29th, Team Chile. If you looked at prediction streams and the roster releases, you'll know that this team lost a pretty significant part of their roster from last year to this year. They had a fantastic performance with number 4th in qualifiers. They're placing 29th this year. They actually had the biggest change in placement of any team this year, changing by 25 spots. They had some good performances from number 37, had a hidden 2 FC, Suntan, put up a double time 3 FC. They actually almost had top 10 on hidden 2 as well.
I think it's pretty tragic to look at this, but honestly, it's not that bad. I think they're still a very, very good team. You can still say the same things we were saying about them last year when they're number 4. Number 37, Gonza and Suntan are still going to be pretty scary to go against. So I think they're still okay.
Yeah, they're gonna have a decent time this year. They have a very good early stage roster. A lot of this roster is some very high skilled 4-digit tournament players that will be able to hold their own on these first few stages. So best of luck to them and their upper half of the bracket opponents that we will be taking a look at a little later. Next up, it's Team 28. It is Spain. An improvement from last year. They barely qualified in 31st. They're going to be pushing up to 28th with some pretty impressive scores this year, actually.
I like that they've got that name synergy now. It's very nice. But a lot of I don't think if you had to give a specific MVP for this, it's probably Antonio, who played every single map, average 650k. But there's a lot of FCs, especially on DTs, by pretty much everyone on the team. So pretty well rounded. I'd be very careful of their DTs. Very strong potential, and like I said, it's on like 4 different players, so you never know who's going to show up.
Yeah, some good DT performances overall is very, very cool to see. The Hard Rock performance from the earlier teams we looked at, very impressive, but DT's had quite a bit of competition at the upper end this year, so it is very impressive to see them in top 20 for DT 1 and 2 in this placement. So watch out for Spain's speed this year. Next up, it's going to be Team 27th place. It is Thailand with a massive improvement from last year. 11 place difference to go from not qualifying to qualifying in 27th. And we had a couple really big performances here too. Phantasma playing 9 out of 11 maps for them, averaging over 600,000.
Yeah, there was some lovely scores here. Phantasma, with the No Mod 2 FC. We had Minecrafter as well with the Hard Rock 2 FC. Tripuk Chet with the DT3 FC. Phantasma got to be the MVP on this. Played 9 out of 11 maps with a 626k average across all maps. So incredible job from Thailand to come from 30th to 27th. I'm looking forward to this team this year.
Yeah, this will be pretty cool from them to see with this much improvement. Phantasma, absolutely outstanding player in this tournament, going to be kind of good for them to see. So I think that with their improvement and the kind of roster that they have here, we mentioned with Phantasma a big performance, and then you mentioned Minecrafter and Taifuk Chep going to be another team with some more command over the map pool than people would give them credit for. They have a pretty good range. So good to see them. Next up, it's going to be Team Sweden in our 26th place, a team that had a pretty massive step up from Silla this year. 10 out of 11 maps played with a 740,000 score average from them. That is stellar.
That is some great scores from Silla there. Norts as well with the Hard Rock 1 FC for Sweden was incredible. We also had some good with both Silla and Blue coming in with Nomad 1 FCs. But again, Silla just playing absolutely insane this year is crazy good to see. And, you know, even though they don't have Reed this year, I've got high hopes. I've got really high hopes for this team. You know, you've got to be careful on some of those maps. That Nomad 1 is deadly.
Yeah. Big aim for this roster this year. Nomad 1 and Hard Rock 1 FCs, Blue and Nots and Silla, all putting up those scores. Like you mentioned, missing Reedcat and you know, even Couch this year is a pretty decent hit for them as a roster as a whole. I actually think if they had them, they might have been able to improve their qualifiers performance this year, but unfortunately they're working with what they got, and they did a pretty good job of it this year. So like you said, I'm excited to see what they're able to do in the bracket stage this time around. Next up in 25th place, another team moving from non-qualifying to qualifying is Team New Zealand. They went from 33rd to 25th this year. Not only did they not miss it this time around, but they pushed well into things this year. We had some pretty good performances from multiple players on this time. Obviously, Zoomer, the big name on this roster, 11 out of 11 maps played, a 700,000 average score. But we also had some good performances from, you know, supporting roles on this team. You know, Saiku on this roster, Nomad 2, Hard Rock 1, DT1 and 2 FCs. It's going down with a Nomad 2 and a DT2 FC. Zoomer FC, Nomad 3, Hidden 2, and DT3. So we've got quite a bit of impressive scores across the board here. You know, we did mention before Sweden with a top 8 placement on Nomad 1. New Zealand's going to be a top 8 placement on Hard Rock 1 in that 8th spot there.
Yeah, I'm looking at this team, and you start to see the sort of performances you need going forward to get into this, you know, top 24 position. You need multiple players pulling out multiple FCs on runs, you know, just have a chance. But this team they've got certain maps that they have gone absolutely insane on. Like I mentioned, the Hard Rock 1, Nomad 2 as well as some of their DT. DT for them is really strong this year. It's great to see.
Love to go from the non-qualifying to qualifying. It is great to see every single time. Speaking of non-qualifying to qualifying, next up is going to be Team Denmark from 34th to 24th. Another 10-place improvement. Serious MVP shoutouts to Polye and I Am a Lover this year. They absolutely brought it home for this team. A Hard Rock 2 8th place finish from them, as well as some pretty solid performances on Hard Rock 1 and Nomad 2. This roster did a good job of working with what they had. The roster improvements, everyone has made some significant gameplay, you know, upgrades from last time around. So They had a pretty decent amount of trouble with some of the maps in this pool compared to their previous performances. Obviously, you know, a team a few years ago that you would have put in easily a top 3 place for the tournament as a whole. Taking their rebuilding years, they had a bit of a rough go last year, still did pretty well in the bracket stage. And this year, they've got a little bit more to prove after this qualifier's performance. A good No Mod 1 score, though. Top 10 on that.
It's kind of hard losing the greatest tournament player of all time. We gotta say it.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that, you know, with the UK, that they're a team that sometimes they have a rough patch every now and then. But I still think that this is a team that definitely has the potential to go a decent way into the bracket. Yes, they don't have the star power of Bubble Man, but you know, a lot of this team is very well balanced. You know, they've got a lot of players that like to target specific maps and specific areas. So, you know, with the right combination on the day, they can still be quite a danger to any team, really.
Absolutely agree. They completed the hard part, which is qualifying for the tournament. Now they just have to outplace their seeding. They did have some good performances on maps. I mean, you look down at, you know, DT and even Hard Rock, 2.5 million, 3 million plus team scores on these. It's really just stuff when you look up at like No Mod 3 and No Mod 2 compared to other scores where they really just dropped the ball a little bit on some maps, and that made a bit of a difference for them. So, you know, maybe better in the bracket stage. Like you said, we'll wait to see what happens there. And of course, we'll get to see their opponent once we enter the top 16 teams. But next up, it's our 19th seeded team. Team Taiwan dropped just barely from 18th seed last time. This is a team that I think definitely underperformed their qualifiers just a little bit from what everyone was expecting. You know, if you looked at pick'ems and the amount of people that placed this team potentially in the top 8 teams, it was quite a few. You know, you see some good performances overall, 6th and 9th on DT 2 and 3, and a very impressive roster overall. To put into perspective, 30% of pick'ems put Taiwan in the top 8 placing teams this year. So I'm very excited to see what they do in the bracket stage this year, as I imagine a lot of other people are.
Listen, I have to pull from my own personal experiences here from all the World Cups that I've played and the amount of times that we got matched up against Taiwan in the first 2 rounds, and they still managed to find tiebreakers out of nowhere. Taiwan is really scary. Yeah. So good luck to whoever's unfortunate enough to actually face them in the first round.
Yeah, really. That 13th seed spot going to be facing off against Taiwan. We'll see who the unfortunate team is. Most notable performance from Taiwan this year on Dazzlewind. 9 out of 11 maps played, and across those 9 maps, an average of almost 700,000. So really good performance from the captain of Taiwan this year. Good for them. We'll move on to number 18th. I know some people are going to be excited about this one. It's Team Italy.
What the?
35th to 18. That's not something you see too often. I know we mentioned earlier a team with the most improvement being 15. Apparently that was incorrect. I didn't realize 17 placement change on Italy from 35th to 18. Shadow Modico playing 11 out of 11 maps, averaging 650,000 score. Wow.
It's kind of nice to see a return of Italy being quite a strong team here. I feel like it's been a couple of years for them. But yeah, I mean, some pretty crazy performances. I think there's a lot of unknown with this team, so I'm pretty excited to see how they end up doing.
Some very notable players on this roster that are good for late stage skill cap as well. You know, you're running with returning players like Ryuzaki and Kirochi. Most notably for Italy this year, actually gaining Arj from San Marino. I know in previous years, Arj was unable to participate for Team Italy, but this year they're gaining a pretty solid tournament player in him, so it's very much reflected in their qualifiers performance. So they'll be facing off against our 14th seeded team when we get to the top 16. Finally, last of the bottom 16 teams, the top of the bottom 16 is our 17th seeded spot. Team Singapore They placed 25th last year. They're going to make that improvement to 17 this time around. 8 placement improvement. They placed top 8 on 3 different maps. Nomad 4, DT1, and DT2, with Megamic FCing DTs 2 and 3 for the roster this year. There's a lot of tournament experience across this as a whole, especially not having Emilia on the roster this year for Singapore. That's I think a loss that a lot of people expected to affect them a little bit this year, and apparently didn't as much as they thought.
Yeah, you're really seeing the years start to stack up on some of these players. Demonacle starting to stack up a few. GS Blank, I think now this is like the 8th World Cup, I think, that they're playing in, or some really high number like that. So Seal as well, I think, starting to stack up a little bit. So I think at this point we're pretty familiar with these players, but it's nice to see, I think, mostly Megamic really stepping up, I think, and kind of just getting some really good MVP plays on this team.
Yeah, this will be good to see from them as well. So a lot of good standout performances from Megamic. Hopefully it continues with some team performances into the bracket stage. That's going to do it for our bottom 16 teams. Now we move on to the top 16. Averages shifting well into the mid 2.5 million plus scores. It's Japan in 16th, most notably dropping down from the top 8 last year, losing a few big players this year. Obviously, no Varvalian for Japan this time around. Really, really unfortunate to not see him for them this year, but they still did a good job making that top 16 placements. Notable performances from Tichy and Iger, going to be Tichy FCing 3 out of 3 of the DTs, every single one of them. And of course, La Plus One, Iger FCing 3 out of 4 of the Nomads. So good tandem performance from them this year, pushing to an 8th place on Nomad 3 and top 6 on DT3. That was a map with some pretty significant competition. So.
Yeah, I think it's great to see Japan still being able to. I know obviously their last year placing is, it's still quite a drop, but at the same time they've still got a solid team here, and that DT3 is just it's insane considering how competitive DT was this time around. So they have got some really, really strong maps in their pool that hopefully they can take advantage of in the bracket stage.
Yeah, gotta be able to move on with the performances despite having, some of your star players missing, and Japan has done a good job of, kind of recovering from the loss of Varvalian this year with some very impressive players on this roster as well. I don't want to detract from the players that they have this year. There are some insanely impressive names still up for Japan this time around. So good on them bringing up the bottom of the top 16. Next up, they brought up the bottom of the top 16 this year. They've made a slight improvement. It's Team Brazil, moving from 16th to 15th, despite losing some of their name brand players this year, most notably both Mistia and Nissan missing from the roster this time around, as well as Mouse Easy not making an appearance. But we are running with an impressive roster nonetheless. Still, we had some pretty star performances. MVP for Team Brazil this time around is actually going to be Luis, setting some ridiculous scores across every single mod category. Brazil going to be taking 4th place on Hard Rock 2, 6th place on Nomad 2, and 8th on Hidden 2.
Okay, but considering that this is basically the same placement for them without those players that you mentioned is pretty crazy. If you think about it, they lost all of their star players and they just replaced all of them, and they're apparently just still as good. So Brazil actually quite scary, I will say.
Yeah, they've had some serious improvement over their roster over the past year. Obviously, players like Zubs and Defons coming back and continuing to perform year after year. Checha, a good addition to the roster this time around, has proven to be a ridiculous tournament player, as well as Korean Maluko continuing to go for them. Xkirito, the only player in OWC that is not within the rank range of the tournament at the present time, was of course at registrations, but is not now actually ranked up to play this tournament specifically, and is 19th place last year with some very good roster additions. Obviously have to make mention of additions of players like Nindrake, Nineric. Penguinsy is stellar on the speed this year as well, but MVPs for this roster this time around is going to be Jompa Tormen and GN. Jompa Tormen top scoring every single Hard Rock for Norway this year, and GN top scoring the hidden pool for the team this time around, as well as some good supporting performances from returning players like Marcus, Melver, and Yokespie. So Norway, big improvement. Good to see.
You know, all I really wish for when it comes to Team Norway is that they make it far enough so that they can play the later pools. I just want to see what Yokespie and GN can do on those, man. It's always a treat.
Yeah, really, you know, you do see them performing on the later stage stuff so much so it's always surprising. You see them in qualifiers, you know, not barely placing top 10 on these hidden maps. You're always, you know, kind of expecting, but it is the nature of the 4v4 and the backing team scores that are necessary sometimes. But next up, a team with some solid improvement as well. 12th seeded Team China this year, moving up 8 places from 20th last year. We've got a serious roster on our hands for China this time around. You know, some pretty linear switches for the roster this time around, but really, really cool to see China making improvements with this roster. Obviously, notable returnees. We've got players like Crystal on here, Milk Tea, Kurumi, David. I mean, this is a star roster, and they have, you know, kind of come out to prove that this year. 4th place and 9th place on Nomads 3 and 4. Notably, Crystal and Fia, the 2 MVPs for China this time around, they did a fantastic job of kind of bouncing back and forth for top scores for the team this time around. So you're almost ranked 5,000 player, and one of your oldest players on your roster being the top 2 performers really gives you some sense of the depth of this Chinese team.
Yeah, I love some of the names that are coming out from this Chinese team as well. They're really starting to coordinate those lovely names. But yeah, just ridiculous good scores across the board for the Chinese team. But yeah, Crystal and Fia just absolutely you know, head and shoulders above the rest, and it's wicked to see. China, they are dangerous this year. Very, very scary stuff.
Yeah, really. This team could have had a seriously good qualifiers placements if actually not for that Nomad 2 performance. Is kind of tragic from them here. Really not a favorite of the streams here. A pretty stark contrast to a team like Mexico at the bottom end of teams with that 4th place team compared to China going on to the 43rd. So we've got them kind of switching things up a bit. Next up, we are going to move to the team just outside of the top 10 this year. It is 11th seeded Romania, improving from 15th last time around. It's going to be stellar performances, MVPs out of Eternum and Badu this year as a whole for the team, both of them bouncing back and forth for good placements this time around. Satono Diamond most notably jumping into the top performers for the team this time around, taking the MVP for the Nomad pool, giving them some, you know, kind of the majority of their qualifiers placements here. 6th, 5th, and 3rd respectively on Nomads 1, 3, and 4.
Honestly, I think this placement might be a little bit of a fluke. I'm pretty sure this team is way better than Seed 11, so it's going to be pretty rough, I think, in terms of brackets if you end up meeting them. We all know the Romania OWC incidents. We'll call it that.
The Grim Reapers.
But I mean, no, they've stepped up their game so much, and I think if they can manage to reach some of the later pools and unlock Badu a little bit, I think it's going to be really scary.
I 100% agree with you. Funny enough, actually, Romania was the first team this year to play their qualifiers all the way back on Thursday, and they maintained first place qualifiers until midway through Saturday. So this is this is a team that's, still up there despite this 11th place seeding. They are a runner in this year for a much higher placement. I mean, we saw last year 15th, they well outplaced that qualifier seeding. So really moving up with the 11th place. I expect them to do much better this year. We're going to move into the top 10 now. It's your 10th seeded team, Team Indonesia. They are going to be dropping from 5th seed last year off of what was one of their most impressive qualifiers performance they have ever had. Still very respectable for 10th seed on Indonesia this time around. You love to see it from them. Generally, this spot has a little bit of a rough go of things sometimes. And the team this time around that's going to be filling that spot, moving into the top 8, is Team France. They're going to be bringing up the coveted 8th place position in the tournament this year, improving from 10th seed from last time around. The luckiest spot in the tournament. Absolutely stellar Hidden 2 from them this time around. A 3.3 million team score, setting the #1 placement on the map. Notable score from Justman as well. One of the highest performing players on their team, SSing the Nomad 2 to give them an improvement on their performance on that map, pushing them to 16th on that, and a 4th place on DT2 as well. So this is not just a roster that is good at one skill set. Again, they're pretty confident across the board. Only placement they had out of the top 20 was on Nomad 1, and even then just missing by 1 spot here. Obviously, returning veterans to the tournament here. Musty repeating for the 11th time, I believe, in OWC, continuing to come back. Ikoro making his return once again. Fils de Lama and Vroom Sivivit coming back for France this year as well. Some amazing roster additions.
Musty, my fellow grandpa. Always nice to see.
Yeah, the roster additions for France this year really making a difference for them. They have so many high performers this year, and it's very much so reflected in their performance. So cool to see new teams taking up these top 8 spots. Funny enough, actually, of the top 8 placements this year, there is, I believe, half of them were not top 8 last year. So if that gives, I don't know how many spoilers that gives. Hopefully not too many, but we'll continue moving through them. Next up, our first team with a 3 million plus team score. Every team after this has 3 million plus team average. It's going to be Russia, moving from 13th to 7th. Crazy improvement from them this year. We have 2nd place overall on the double time pool. Every single double time map Russia took 2nd place on. That is a performance that not a lot of teams can show for themselves on here. That is absolutely great from them. Vacman playing 10 out of 11 maps in their counted runs, most notably. So not just all of the maps played, but almost all maps played in their run that is what is counted for their qualifiers performance. So Vacman, going to be big for them this year, as well as Chikuni. Good addition from previous years, has really proven to be a great tournament player over the past year.
Yeah, something that's pretty noteworthy about this is most of the teams that are going to be around this placement will always have like one giant carry, or maybe like 2 or 3. But I mean, in the case of Russia, it kind of wasn't a one-person job. You know, it's kind of just everyone pulled their weight. Obviously, like you said, Chikoni and Vakman were up there in terms of player averages, but kind of everyone is up there. So it's a pretty scary, well-rounded team, I feel like.
Well, I am exceptionally excited to see Russia kind of I think there's been a lot of jokes about Russia in previous years because I think for the longest time Russia was almost that team that they looked so good in this tournament, and then they would almost hit semifinals every year and almost hit like the brick wall where they would always lose in semis every single time. And I think this is a pretty good chance that they have this year to maybe make an improvement on that consistent performance from them. Next up,
let's talk about carries.
Yeah, really. It's Australia. Oh, one of you can ring this one off because this is too much.
Okay, so there's a screenshot of the of the match costs of their qualifier runs, and Emrek just has twice as much as anyone else on the team, sitting in qualifiers as the highest average score of all maps, and that sits at over 1 million. Emrek has an average of over 1 million score on all maps, all 11, both runs actually, all 22 maps. But that's not to discount anybody else on the team, really. Like they really showed up on. Obviously, the team is not just Emrek. It's good that there's a lot of support around him. I think they really built a roster that plays to his strengths. And every damn year we say it's like, where's Australia? They're gonna do good. And then I think this is the first time where they actually do place really well. So. People have been talking about that in chat as well. They finally avoided the 8th place curse, so that's really good on them.
Yeah, the bracket advantage for them this year, no longer facing the number 1 seeded team so early in here, really is good to see. You mentioned a team built around helping Emrek this year, kind of playing to the team's strengths overall. Have to mention, a player like Doomy coming out, pretty much getting the second highest performance on the roster this year. One of the oldest returning Australian players for this roster. Every single year comes back and performs exceptionally for them. So great to see. And then, of course, we can't really say enough. Emrek FCing 11 out of 11 maps. That's really not something you see in this tournament very often. So, good on them. Very much good on them. And Australia going to be taking the 6th spot this year. Last up is our last of the teams that made their push into the top 8 this year. I mentioned half the top 8 teams are different this time around. The 5th seeded team is no different. Moving up from 9th to 5th is going to be South Korea, despite missing Flying Tuna this year. You really have to mention Karcher and worst HR player. This is a roster with some absolutely exceptional, team synergy overall. They have ridiculous placements. They place 2nd and 3rd on Hidden and Hard Rock respectively, but Karcher playing 10 out of 11 maps with an 800,000 score average, as well as worst HR player with 8 out of 11 maps played and a 750,000 score average. South Korea, as a team as well, I talk about the team performance being a big indicator of their success this year without a player like Flying Tuna. They have the most second place map finishes of any team. At 5 out of 11 maps, they have the second place finish on, the next closest being 3. So this is a team that is good at multiple categories across their entire roster. I expect good performance.
I don't know how this happens every year. South Korea just comes up and brings up like 3 or 4 new players that we haven't really heard of too much, and then they just turned out to be insanely good. We've talked about Karcher a little bit, but I mean, worst HR player actually placing in the top 10 of all players. Sitting at number 9 for his score contributions. And also someone we haven't really mentioned at all is Amamiya Kokoro, which is also right next to Karcher at 23 of all players. So really, really solid performances, honestly. I'd be pretty scared. I mean, I've seen that about a lot of teams, but I mean, seriously, for this one, there's not a lot of precedent. I feel like some of these players we've seen in recent tournaments. I think most notably they did a good run in Corsace, right? But that's other than that, we haven't really heard much from them. So maybe some new beginnings happening here.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of uncertainty going into this year's qualifiers because I think there were, more teams than usual that made larger switches to their rosters as a whole. And because of that, it was a little bit more difficult to predict where teams were going to place. So it's good to see that these new, players on these rosters are really backing up the existing teams to push them to new heights. And South Korea did it this time around. Now, the 4 most coveted spots in the tournament, well, I should say the 4 most coveted. Top 3 is obviously the most coveted placements here, but the 4 teams this time around, we're going to start it off with our 4th seed, falling from 2nd, but still top 4. It's Team Canada. They had single-digit placements on every single map. You're going to see that for all of these top 4 teams here. 4th, 6th, 5th, and 5th from Nomad all the way down to Double Time. Again, cutting their placement or doubling their placement from last year, moving from 2nd to 4th, but still a very respectable performance from them this year, placing only out of the top 10 on Nomad 2 and Nomad 4. Very, very outstanding performance from Ryuk this year, playing 8 out of 11 maps with an 850,000 score average, including a double time 1 SS for the team this year. I believe that was actually the only double S on the map this year, or this time around. I'm going to fact check myself on that before I tell everyone that is the case. Yes, it was 2 double S's on that map. I will get to the other one later, but there was 2 double S's on D2, but one of them was Ryuk. Notably, Ryuk did not play double time 2 for this roster, and that was actually their worst double time map placement of the 3 of them. So a good performance overall. Xylus 971k on Hidden 1 as well, I should mention, the captain.
Yeah, Ryuk, Zudi, and Xylus placing fairly high up there in the player averages. I think Ryuk at 6, Zudi at 13, Xylus at 17. You'd kind of expect them to be up there. And I think, I don't think, it's weird looking at this, going from 2nd place to 4th place. I don't think they got worse. I think the other teams that we haven't talked about yet just got a hell of a lot better. I mean, it's not hard to guess which ones are ahead, but I mean, we'll talk about them once we get there. It's worth talking about.
Most certainly so. I think once we go over that 3rd place team, it's gonna be pretty evident who the top 2 are. So, if you've been keeping track of teams, there are only 3 teams left, and it is going to be the 3rd place team, Germany, placing in the exact same spot as last year. They're going to bring back the 3rd place. They took number 1 on the Nomad pool this year, despite placing 14th on Nomad 4. They were able to take numbers 1, 2, and 3 on Nomad's 1, 2, and 3 respectively, and top 8 performances on almost every other map besides Double Time 1. White Cat once again popping off in the World Cups, the 5th best player overall in qualifiers this time around, playing 10 out of 11 maps, averaging 834,000 overall in qualifiers this time around, as well as Kriller. We've seen performances in Corsace this year and multiple other tournaments. It is very much reflected in this as well.
Yep, Kriller, top 3 of all players. I mean, it's not like it's not expected. We all know by now that Kriller's kind of insane, but yeah, I think it was pretty interesting today if you were following the player streams when they were playing the qualifiers and all that. I think the qualifier schedule was pretty late heavy, I guess. Like all the top teams are playing near the end, so you're watching the Germany lobby and they're like, damn, they're doing pretty good. And then suddenly, an hour later, you hear about the results from the 2nd place team, and it is Poland, And I just want to say that Malashevsky's average accuracy over all 11 maps is 99.7. How?
That is not normal.
And how many SSs does he have? I think he has 4 SSs, right?
Is it? It was either 4 or 3. I should let me roll through really quickly for everyone here just to let you know. So, a 99.9% FC on DT2, almost a double S, had the second double S on DT1, had an SS on Hidden 2, an SS on Nomad 4, and an SS on Nomad 2.
So somehow, after seeing Emmerich with the crazy match cost on that one, well, turns out Malashevsky's actually a little bit ahead. So congratulations to him for, I guess, for being the MVP of all the qualifiers. I mean, it's well deserved. These scores are kind of crazy, but I mean, that's just one player, right? One player is not enough to just shoot up a team and have them place top 2. There's so much more that went into that, and I think a lot of really good shared performances from a lot of players we haven't seen too much of. I think most notably Bartek returning from pooling, I think did pretty well. Expecting a lot of great things, I think, from most of the people on this roster, but a lot of relatively new names.
Yeah, definitely so. You know, you got to mention players like even Mustache and Rafis. You know, I think Mustache, obviously a player who, you know, has been here before. Rafis, of course, as well. Both of them coming out and doing exactly what they needed to do this year. They've both made some significant improvements. Rafis just continues to get better and better over time. And Mustache has, unironically, you know, not been talked about as much, but has struck me with some pretty significant improvement over the past few years. So, you know, or the past few months, even most notably. So, really, really cool to see Poland making their push for a top 3 spot this year. We haven't really seen them with a notable OWC performance since 2017 when they won the tournament. So maybe their biggest shot since then this year, qualifiers, if that's anything to go off of. Obviously missing Wubwolf as well. We should mention the first time that they are missing him for the roster this year. But that's going to be your second place spot. Pretty sure that narrows it down. I don't want to kill the hype or anything, but very unsurprisingly, and a very big congratulations once again to the United States. They will be your number 1 seeded team in the tournament. Something I should note that I don't think has been noted every other year we've done these seeding showcases. The United States has been the number 1 qualifying team for the OSU World Cup every single year that qualifiers has been instated in this tournament. I feel like that gives some ridiculous perspective to things. But again, they performed well across all maps. Number 1 in Hidden and Hard Rock. Number 3 in Nomad and Double Time, and unironically, the biggest roster changes that this team has had in a very long time. Normally, you don't see the United States switching out a whole lot of players. I believe 4 different players on this roster from last year. So some big shifts for them.
I think one quick thing I wanna point out is that there's a pretty significant difference in score or like seeding results between all of these teams. Usually it gets a little close, but once you get to Australia, every team after that, so between Australia, South Korea, Canada, Germany, Poland, USA, there are some quite large differences in score. So I think it's pretty interesting that there's kind of like a clear top-down view. You know, there was not really any question of how close maybe some of the seeding were, or if there was maybe a difference. You know, if I didn't find that miss, the seeding would have changed. No, there are like over 100k differences in score from all of these top placing teams, which is pretty interesting, I think. But that maybe says something about how dominant the USA still is, considering the crazy stuff we just talked about with Poland and Germany. So
Seriously, these are some good teams, and that really is just not saying enough. These, I really think all of the top 4 this year, everyone can be excited for what these 4 teams are going to be able to put up with performances this time around. And even all the top 8 teams, I think we're expecting some pretty impressive stuff out of them this year. As usual, all amazing rosters. Congratulations! That is going to conclude the teams showcase from qualifiers. The challenge bracket will be updated relatively soon, as well as our pick'ems, HaloWatchers pick'ems, rather, I should say. They are not ours. HaloWatcher runs them. Make sure to submit your picks into those for the round of 32 match-ups that will be happening next weekend. We will also have team country banners up as usual for all of the top 32 qualifying teams sometime either this weekend or next weekend. We will also have donations open for our Open Collective page, so we are accepting viewer donations to the prize pool this time around. So if you would like to donate and support the teams placing in this tournament, we are now accepting those through the Open Collective page. You can find more information about that in the Twitch chat. But again, as always, congratulations to our top 32 place teams. Best of luck to them in the bracket stage. They will all be facing off starting next weekend all the way through grand finals. But with the round of 32 starting,